Grazie a Carole Naggar che è arrivata fino a Venezia, per fortuna, perché c'è il festival di fotografia a Vol, allora così è partita da New York per essere qui. E anche una volta, anche io da 79, da quando ho fondato la galleria, per vedere la fotografia, come vedete qui, si doveva partire a New York per andare al museo, a qualche galleria, anche MoMA, Museo d'Arte Moderna di New York, aveva solo 2 grandi stanze, una per 800 e una per il XX secolo, tutto era differente. Ecco, allora in tutti questi anni, 44 anni di galleria, Bernie Sebot che qui ha 4 fotografie in mostra, che ha avuto la mostra nell'86 a Venezia, mi ha fatto incontrare il anonimo veneziano che è autore di questa bellissima, enigmatica collezione di massime fotografie, diciamo anche tante autrici, perché fotografe, perché sono 5 fotografe, solo 2 fotografi. Anche lui partiva sicuro sempre a New York, ma tutto questo è iniziato nel caso suo, che si vede bene dal suo testo che è nel catalogo, perché si ricordava di sua zia, che anche lei, come dopo queste cose magari vi dirà anche Carole Naggar, perché ovviamente c'è una chiave di questa mostra, che proprio parte dall'anonimo veneziano e ha una fotografia dell'anonimo. Ecco, voglio dire assolutamente, quando finalmente ho visto le cose l'anno scorso, ho deciso subito di fare la mostra e qui vedete il risultato, e assolutamente era necessario mettere queste fotografie in un contesto dell'epoca e anche di storia della fotografia. Anche per questo Carole Naggar è già presente nel catalogo con il suo testo e anche oggi qui, e potevamo decidere di lavorare insieme perché abbiamo già nell'81 iniziato a fare le cose. E allora c'è questo catalogo che è nell'inglese, francese e italiano, che è un catalogo scientifico ma anche molto divertente, perché anche la mostra è, diciamo, un labirinto, e vi consiglio se non altro di guardarlo, e adesso do parola a Carole Naggar.
Okay, allora, everything in my life happened by links and by chance. And it is by chance that last year I was in Venice, coming from Milano, and I met again Jiva, who has been a friend, I don't dare say how many years, but since the 1980s. And at that time, there was no photography gallery in Venice. Photography was not present on the scene. It was only a few pioneer women and men, like Jiva, that had started photography in Venice. So I said everything is a link. And all the photographers, except 1 or 2 in this exhibition, are coming from Europe and going to New York, or the other way around. They are all links between their own countries. And by chance, or maybe by coincidence, this is also my life, being in exile and going from Paris to New York, to Paris, where I have a place in New York and a very small place in Paris. So that was a perfect match. And I'm going to take you to the back of the gallery, where there is a very mysterious photograph, and it will serve as an introduction to the tour. And of course, this is all these pictures are here because there is this anonymous collection, just like the anonymous photograph, who, through his encounter with Jiva, they both decided that this was the place to show his collection. So let's go to the other side. And here you see a portrait of a woman. And this is the only photograph in this exhibition where the author is unknown. It is an anonymous photograph. And a few years back, our collector was traveling in Los Angeles, and he found that photograph at a fair. And he was intrigued, he was drawn to it. And because of his life, an aunt of his started his interest in photography. And I thought, after writing the catalog, only now, it's always like this, you have remorse. Oh, I did leave that out from the catalog. I should have thought about it, but it's just after the fact. So we call it esprit d'escalier, when you think only in French, because you only think of what you should have said when you are going away in the dialogue. So this photograph is mysterious. And it dates back to the 19th century, we think. Maybe the end of the 19th century, I'm not sure. Probably because before that there was only the daguerreotype, where people had to pose for a long time. And they never smile, because it was a very long exposure. And they had a sort of clamp that held their face together so they could pose for the photographer. And this was really attractive to me, because it's a minimalist. It's like a drawing with light, or maybe with a shadow in that case. And it reminded me of the photographs of several noted photographers that came after, like Hugo Mulas, for instance, who is very well known for his study of photography that's called Trasformazioni, where he sort of deciphers the process of photography. And this, in a way, is primal images, not primitive, but primal. This is something we don't know about, but it draws us because of its mystery. It made me think of something that happened in last century, but also in our century. Maybe you know it from the streets of Venice. There were these people who saw passers-by, and then they cut out silhouettes in black paper with scissors. And these were given to the person and sold, of course. So this made me think of that picture. So, in a way, this is the nucleus or the beginning of a collection, in my view, but maybe our collector has another idea. Anyway, I would say that all the photographs in that exhibition are not contemporary. They are photographs that existed in contact sheet. They were not digital, of course. So let's go maybe here. This photograph is a little bit different. This is a photograph of Picasso at the corrida. And this was in Arles in 1957. And what happened is that he was a very young photographer who had just entered the prestigious agency Magnum Photos. And he admired some of the founders, Schim and Kappa, who had photographed already Picasso. So I think he wanted a little bit to prove himself to his elder members. So it's an interesting story. So you see Picasso, but how did this happen? And this young photographer had to earn a living and bring money to the agency. So he was on the other side of the Pyrenees in Spain, and he was doing an assignment for a big magazine. I don't remember. I think it was either Fortune or Harper's Bazaar. And then he finished his assignment. He sat in a cafe and he got those newspapers there on the table. He looked, and here there was a tiny notice saying Picasso goes to the corrida. So he jumped in his car, he drove all night, and he arrived in Arles, and he found a room in a little hotel. And this is here where chance and coincidence happen. He arrived in the hotel, and the receptionist thought that he was with the group where Picasso was with his friends. So she told him, here, room 12. So he says, okay. He comes in, and he sees Picasso standing on a bed, leading an imaginary orchestra. And in front of him, there were a whole bunch of Spanish and French people who were making music. So that was like incredible for this young photographer to arrive, see his idol, and see what was happening totally by chance. So they brought him in. At that time, the relationships were maybe easier between the photographers and the public and their models. It was no ceremony, very easy. He's taken into the group, and he follows Picasso everywhere. So here, Picasso is at the corrida, and normally he's dressed up with in a very desultory, disinvolved way. He's wearing maybe a Hawaiian shirt and a canotier when he's in his studio, but here he dressed up. He has this black shirt, the new hat. And what I find very interesting in that picture is that he's in the first row, but there's this whole relationship in a triangle between all the hands that respond to each other. So maybe he was influenced by Cartier-Bresson's Decisive Moment, I don't know. And what I also like is that someone else is photographing. So in a way, it is as if Bury, who's right in front of that wall, is showing things in a mirror. And the little story is that he was a great admirer of the Toreador, and so he gave him his hat at the end. The Toreador gave him his little hat, which is a special black hat like this, and Picasso gave him his watch. So Bury went on to a notorious career. Was a friend of his, and he belonged to the group in Magnum, and he did a lot of other photographs for 50 years until he died a few years back. So now, let's see. I'll take you to this photograph, which is also a bit of a oddity in the show, because it's the only one that was not taken during the years 1930, 1950. So I'll go back a little bit to how all this happened and how the exchanges between Europe and New York happened. And this is a period that is incredibly rich in history, but it's also a period of a lot of turmoil. We have two wars. We have the Spanish Civil War, 1936 to 1938-39, where the Republicans lose to Franco. And I forgot to tell you that Picasso never set a foot in Spain when Franco was in power. And Bury also never went to Spain. But at that time, when the Republicans lost, and during the battles, there was this concept that photography could change the world. And maybe this seems like an alien concept to us today, because photography is everywhere in the media, and maybe it has become more like an object and less like a goal. So during the Spanish Civil War, Capa, Cartier-Bresson, and Chim and Tarot, who died on the field, went to Spain to cover the Republican side, which was the progressive side. This side was beaten, and as a result, 500,000 Spaniards who feared Franco arrived all in France through the mountains of the Pyrenees, the same mountains that Bury crossed. And it was pretty awful, because the French government, which had been in favor of the Republicans, turned around. They turned their jacket, that's vest, as we say in France, and they decided that they had to be allies to Franco because everything, the strength was there. The Germans who bombarded Guernica, as you know, the Italians, Spain formed a new bloc that was not progressive. So these people gave a foundation to photojournalism, photos to change the world. And then in many parts of Europe, other photographers invented some sort of photography that was completely different from the photo reportage. They belonged, some to the Bauhaus, others to other schools, and they invented something that was called new objectivity, where the photographs became a document. But they also invented, especially women, because we have a lot of women in that show, almost all of them, they invented something that's called the new vision, that was, on the contrary, something that was surrealist inspired, where you could explore any shape and kind of photography. The photograms, which is direct contact of between the camera and paper, the flou, the photomontage, all these forms came from the 1920s. And she, Francesca Woodman, who had a very short and unhappy life because she committed suicide at age 20-something, she had a great form of depression. She has a whole story with Italy. Her parents had a house near Florence, and she spent her first years there. Her father gave her a camera, and she was a sort of a precocious genius. She studied a little bit, but mainly her big influence was surrealism. She found a gallery where she met several writers and painters, and she was also influenced by all the statuary of the drapes and so on of the classical sculptures in Italy. So she started to set up a studio. This is a very early picture. Maybe she was, we don't know the exact date, but she might have been something like 16, 17, or maybe early 20s. I don't know because no date, right? So she borrowed a studio, which was an old dilapidated spaghetti factory, actually. And she started using that studio, which was a studio from a friend. And here we have this mysterious hand holding a globe that has some sort of magic to it, because it reminds us of these women who predicted the future, and they always had these crystal ball in front of them to predict the future. And she was a lot into predictions, magic, and she prepared all her photographs very, very carefully. It's not really a performance, but she tried out where the people would be in the photograph, and then she placed herself carefully, and sometimes she brought all sorts of accessories. So this is him, and this hand is probably hers, or a model, we don't know. Because what she did was step in the picture and put the camera on retard, right, so that she would be in. But it could also be a model. So all these things we don't know. So there's another mystery in the photograph, I think. This is a picture of Dorothea Lange, and she is well known first as her belonging to a group called the FSA. The United States in the 20s and 30s were the prey of huge depression. It was called the bitter years, les années amères. And to counter this huge economic depression where the farmers were dispossessed because there were huge tempests of storms and sand, and they couldn't cultivate their land anymore. So a lot of farmers started from the south to the north. There was huge immigration inside the US, but on hundreds of kilometers, and they had nothing to eat. And they assaulted almost the places where you could get free food, cantinas, I think. Long was first well known for her photograph of a farmer, a woman who is in her 30s, but she had so much trouble in her life that she looks more like 50s. Her face is all tense. She's holding her two children that are incredibly poor against her chest, and they are turning away from her. Then she did very, I would say, engagé, like the 1930s photographer, and she documented the concentration camps where the Japanese Americans were held. If you don't know the story, under the McCarthyism in the 1950s, America, which was not very liberal, to say the least, decided to imprison all Japanese Americans because they were fighting against Japan, and they put them in concentration camp in Meisenach and other places. And when she photographed that, even though it was an assignment from the Farm Security Administration, they decided that it was too harsh. It was too accusatory to the government, and they never showed the picture until the maybe mid-50s, 60s. So they were discovered later. Other than that, she did a photograph of the bread lines, people queuing for food. But this is very different. At some point, she was working for Life magazine, and her assignment was together with Ansel Adams. You probably know his name as the great landscape photographer. So they went together to small villages that were transforming rapidly. They were very peaceful and away from everything. A lot of Quakers and Shakers, and very simple life, but little by little modern life was encroaching. So they photographed motels, huge publicities, and so on. Then Ansel and her had a falling out because she had photographed people without asking specifically for their permission, and he disapproved of that. So as a result, she did hundreds of photographs, and Life magazine chose about 35, which was a big portfolio at the time. And it's a little bit extraordinary in Life magazine because Life's motto was photograph the people. And only her and Andreas Fenninger, which you will see later, did something that was more like still lifes or landscapes. Also, I have to tell you that the owner of Life magazine was a precursor, a pioneer, in the sense that he created a photography magazine that was in millions of households. Millions, literally maybe 30 millions of households had Life magazine on their coffee table. But his politics were more on the right. He was the son of a Chinese missionary, and he was Mr. All-American. And so when a lot of photographers emigrated from Europe to the States because they were pursued by the Nazis, they were maybe Jewish, their politics were on the left, people like Kappa, like Seymour, and many others, unknown and unknown, like Kertész, also whom you may know, like hundreds. Literally, artists, photographers, everybody tried to flock to New York if they had a relationship, if they knew a colleague, if they had family. At all costs, they wanted to leave Europe because it was very dangerous. So Henry Luce, the owner of Life, said this sentence that's very cynical: I only have to sit here and they will all arrive. And he said it's in an even more aggressive way. So, like many others, almost all, I think, all of the people in that show, she was born in the States, and she said something that really touched me because I had at some point my knee problems and I was walking badly. She had poliomyelitis, and as a result, she had a stiff leg. So she said that having that made her more attentive to the vulnerable people, have more empathy. And also because she was a woman, she was able to approach people and they didn't see her as menacing because she had that problem. So she said it entirely shaped her world in some ways. Because normally photographers have to walk very fast, they have to be able to crouch, so it's really a handicap. So this photograph, which is, she was arriving into that region where the economic progress was happening and America was changing. And she lifted her head and she photographed the clouds. And in a way, they are a little bit ominous. Maybe she was thinking of all the stuff that happened to her because she took some risks during the McCarthyism. Maybe it has nothing as a signification, it's just lyrical. But what happened is that Luce completely changed the photograph when he published it. He cropped it like this. It became a quarter-page vertical, and he called it, what did he call it? God's open, or something like that. And it has nothing to do with God. It has something to do with a cloud. You cannot. So very often in the magazines, the editors were twisting the photographs with different captions and giving them a significance that maybe they didn't have. It's only with Magnum that we had this story of photographers controlling their photographs and having a stamp in the back saying no cropping, no changing of captions. Photographers are authors. They are like writers, they are authors. But in the time of Kappa and Chim, that's not what happened. First of all, they had no control. In our times, it's all digital. You can send the pictures immediately to the editor. In their time, they had to find a pilot or a train that brought photographs to Paris from Spain. And the editors did whatever they wanted. They cropped, they put the photographs double page in different shapes. They superimposed, they combined two photographs. It was a very different situation. It's actually quite beautiful. In a magazine like Vue and Regard in France, which inspired Henry Luce for life. And that's another example of exchanges between the two cities. And maybe I should have told you in the, it's the immanence of God. That's the title that was given, which is like, wow, religion and clouds, what's going on? So anyways, what I should have told you maybe in the beginning, but again, the esprit d'escalier, is that between New York and Europe, the exchanges between this period were extremely rich, and that the European cities, which were at the time more of a magnet for photographers than the US, and this has changed completely at this time. The market is in New York, the galleries are in New York, and Europe has taken a second seat, maybe. Maybe not, because even in the city you can see photographs everywhere. So anyways, what happened is that each city and each place brought something. And it's a little bit like when you learn a language. Say, I'm between French and English, and maybe because I speak English, my French becomes more concise. Sorry, I speak for so long. But also, the French influences the English in my head, and English becomes more florid and more with different turn of phrases. And this is what happens with photography, with these two languages. They constantly interact with each other. the style of the photographer starts to change as they travel back and forth. And here, that's a prime example of what I'm talking about. This is Berenice Abbott, and she was one of Giva's maybe first encounters with photography. And Abbott came, she went first to Paris, and she absolutely wanted to meet Adjé, who is a 19th century photographer who photographed the stuff that was disappearing from Paris. Paris was getting modernized, and all the shop windows, the signs, the whole ambiance of Paris was changing. And so she was fascinated by Adjé, and she went there and she did a book on him and made him known in photography circles. And at the time, Adjé was considered a documentarian. He was not in the history of photography as art. He was just, oh, this guy, he's walking around with his cart and his big glass plates, and he's making pictures at every corner. Why? What is he documenting? And what he was documenting is nostalgic, because he knew that the city was changing in front of his eyes. So Berenice goes back to Paris with the book that's going to be published, and she thinks she's going to stay for a few days, and she stays 10 years. And her main series is about, it's called Changing New York. She explains in her memoirs, in notes, that she also, like Adjé, she knew that New York was changing drastically, and she wanted to document that moment. So in that case, she photographed on both sides of the street. This is a gunsmith, and you could see a revolver on the top, and of course, it's now in the times of AK-47s with various disasters happening in the States, this has disappeared. I think if you walk that street now, you would see probably something completely gentrified. This was on the Lower East Side in New York, which was one of the most traditional parts of New York. Okay, so then we move on to this photograph, which is also by Abbott. And here she starts to have a style that's a little different, because she has included the statue of someone from the past, with Governor Piter from New York, but she also included these buildings that are growing and like sprouting at incredible speed in New York. And he was a very important figure in the 17th century, and it seems as if he's looking to the sky in a very maybe arrogant, at least, posture. And his statue had a funny story, because it looks very solid. It's made out of stone, but it was displaced 3 times. And in this space, there is now a memorial to September 11. So I sort of researched all this, because I didn't even know who he was, and discovered that statues are not eternal. And I don't know if you know that, but right now, especially in the States where the political parties are in a big divide, a lot of statues are being dismantled. Maybe because they represent political figures that are seen as racist, colonialist, or whatever. And for instance, there's one that really struck me in front of the National Museum of the Museum of Natural History on the Upper West Side of New York, where I often went with my children when they were smaller. They have collections of dinosaurs, they have animals, everything. So the statue in the front represented Theodore Roosevelt, who was an American president. He's on a horse, and on each side of the horse on the one side there is a black man holding a gun. On the other side, there is a Native American holding a gun. And really, we don't know if they are guides or if they are dominated by this man who was also an explorer. So it's possible that they were guiding him in his research. So this statue was considered bad and off. So every time I go in front of the museum, this part is empty. So that's the statue. And this one is Margaret Bourke-White. She was a very interesting character. She was extremely brave. She was one of the only women to go to the front in World War II, which was very unusual. She was a pilot, and she also fought on the ground as a war correspondent. But she was an incredibly ambitious woman and didn't make a lot of friends because of that. This is a woman at age 23 declared, I'm going to be rich and I'm going to be famous. That's a lot of goal, but she did. Because she had incredible energy, incredible strength, and she also went to places that were usually forbidden to photographers. For instance, she was one of the first people to go to Russia when they were doing their 5-year plans for industry. And she did several books on Russia. She made maybe 30 books or more in her life. And then she was in New York, and she did a lot of work with the industry, with the machines. She was fascinated with machines and how they relate to man. So she was in New York, and she was doing an assignment on hats for a magazine, which is funny for us, but at the time, I don't see one hat in this public. Nobody would go out without wearing a hat. So she was on the top of a building, and she created this incredible picture with all these geometric things and all the hat. And if you look carefully, you will see only 2 people without a hat. That's fun to go and watch. And to me, they are a little bit like the pieces on a chess board, black and white, and how they move around. And also it's a mystery because we do not know if they are going to work, if they are part of a demonstration, if they are coming out of the L subway that run near there. Mystery. So she had an assignment, but she managed to do something of her own. And that was only often the case with photographers, because they did what was asked by the editor, but on the side, they always did something personal, almost always. And this, I think, though I was not able to find the issue of the magazine, that's probably the opening picture, full page or double page. This one is by Andreas Feininger, who also has a very interesting story. He was raised in Europe. He was the son of Lux Feininger, who was a very noted painter who studied with Paul Klee, with Kandinsky in the Bauhaus, where they were learning to photograph, but also did architecture, design, everyday objects, and it was a very well-rounded education. So his son was drawn to architecture, but again, the war disrupted his plans because he was Jewish and he moved countries because he had no more visa to work, no more permit. He moved to Sweden, and then he decided to change career and become a photographer. But he was extremely gifted scientifically. He built in his life a huge number of teleobjective cameras and he says that it's only with that type of camera that you can actually see the city of New York because they are the only cameras that let you see the background. They shorten the view and they let you see the background as much as the foreground. So for this picture, he was on the Brooklyn landing and he was looking towards Manhattan. And this is like a landmark in New York. It's the Brooklyn Bridge. So Feininger was one of the very few photographers who published extensively in Life magazine, maybe 40 reportages, and who focused exclusively on architecture. And he built many more cameras, and he was a technician that he published manuals on cameras and technique. And his other love was biology and photographing plants, shells, always in a way that made the object very mysterious. So when I started writing on photography, he was alive and he sent me a statement. Every photographer in the book sent me a statement. I had a lot of trouble because a lot of photographers don't like to talk or write, but very interesting. So I said that he photographed these plants and these shells. And if you turn around here, this is a photograph by Ilse Bing, who had a really interesting career. She was German, and she started her career with very different photographs. She was very multi-gifted. She did fashion, she did still lifes, she did reportage. And it's only in her last years that she was recognized by a big exhibition in Berlin and another in New York. But she had the fate of a lot of women photographers that were maybe not written out of history, but did not become as famous as their male counterparts. So I love this image because, and I'm happy that Jiva placed it with the other lights, because it's all about life and shadows. Here she placed this orchid, which is, it's a special orchid in Japan. They give it to the person who's going to travel because it's a goodbye and good luck. She chose a very peculiar flower that has no leaves on the stem. And it's resting in this crystal glass. And here you see both a mirror effect, because there's the shadow with sort of little windows of light in it. And then the whole, how is it called? The window covering with lattice of wood, maybe, is seen in that light, so that the light and the shadows are everywhere. And of course, photography was first called drawing with light. And we said that the first photography in the show was maybe drawing with a shadow. So I'm happy that this is next to the big Berenice Abbott. And you see immediately the difference between that photographer who was interested in intimacy and what they have in common, not the size, not the intent, but the idea that photography is not necessarily of the intent, but it could be framed, reflected upon, and seen from various perspectives. So this is probably Abbott's most famous photograph. And I'm going to go on this side and stay with you. This photograph was carefully set up. She went on the top of a huge building. I told you she was remarked by Life magazine and set up as an industrial photographer and architectural photographer. And eventually she put that picture on her calling card when she set up her studio in New York. So what she did was go, obviously, on top of a very high building, and I am not able to tell you which, but maybe someone who knows New York better than me will tell you. But what she did is wait. what was she waiting for? She was waiting for the shortest day of the year in December. And why? Is because she could at the same time make a nice photograph and have all the windows of the offices lit up, so that she has both night and day in a way in the photograph. And it's only at that moment in the year that it could happen, because otherwise it's the workers have left and all the windows are dark. So she set up and she did an exposure of 15 minutes. And then what you could see, like in this composition, like going like in a diagonal, this is a subway that goes over. It's up, it's not under. It's called the elevated L. Doesn't exist anymore, but it crossed Broadway, which is the biggest artery, biggest road in New York. And Broadway goes all the way to Canada. So you have this amazing composition where here creates two triangles, one big and one small. So I will conclude with that, and I would be very happy if you ask some questions. Because, okay, and thank you for being here. So open microphone for everybody and tell me what you think or what you have questions about or comments or anything. I'd be happy to answer. And I mean, any question, even if you are not specialized in photography, that's welcome. You know.
I have a question also for the anonymous Venetian.
Yes.
Sure, that it will.
And we don't know if it's a Venetian, by the way.
I don't know either.
Everybody
maybe,
can project on that photograph.
Exactly. So maybe if the anonymous Venetian would like to tell us something about what happened, why this exhibition here, and
yes,
what happened, why?
Of
Are
course.
you an anonymous
He's the anonymous collector who found the anonymous photograph.
So I'm not Venetian, first of all. I have a special link with Venice, and also thanks to Jiva, this special link that I have with the city. Basically, it's a recollection, this exhibition of two persons that was very linked to them. And these two persons are my aunt and my the father of my grandfather, who basically I don't have any photo of them, notwithstanding they were doing photographs on an amatorial basis. And with the purpose of this collection that I have understood thanks to Jiva and to the exhibition that thanks to Jiva I made, is basically to have the picture, which I don't have any kind of recollection, because I remember when I was a child with these two special people that we were together in their dark room to print the photos, but I don't have a clear recollection of the subjects. So basically, not in a conscious way, I have to say, I've created what basically does not exist, but just a recollection of their memory.
I think it's really important because, first of all, it is as if this photograph was born from the absence of memory, because you knew very little about your background. And also, there's the magical aspect of the photograph. In the time where it was not digital, you could see the photograph emerge from the bath of a révélateur, which means revelatory in France. And you could see the image appear. So it was magical, and a lot of people were drawn to photography because of being in this camera obscura and seeing how something came to the surface. So that's what I felt also when you had that photograph.
Una ragazza che vuole porre una domanda.
Posso fare una domanda?
Sì.
Faccio in inglese. Sì. No, what do you think about the manipulation of an images?
You mean the current manipulation or the one that took place as early as the 1930s?
In the 1940s, because
Okay.
we think every photograph, every image is spontaneous, but maybe not always it is.
I think that the idea of manipulating images came early. You could see, for instance, Man Ray made photograms by putting the object directly on paper, so that then you had an image of the object in positive and the background in negative. So a lot of people at the Bauhaus practiced various ways of transforming reality. Then, during the 1930s, people like Artfield created the collage and the photomontage first in a very political way to fight the Nazis. So you could see images of Goering with a lot of gold falling on his head to show how corrupt he was. So that was more the 1930s. And then a lot of people embraced this. And nowadays, with the AI, a lot of people are saying, well, this is a tradition that goes back, there is nothing new. But I don't believe this, because first of all, because of social media, the image can be turned around to create fakes. I mean, I've seen some terrifying examples of an image. If you give a prompt to the AI, whatever system, DALL-E or others, you could say, I want the owner, a daguerreotype of the owner of a plantation smiling. So, of course, they had slaves. Of course, it's impossible for them to smile because the daguerreotype was not even invented so it's a completely fake image. And certainly, they should not be shown smiling. So we are in the era of fakery. And a lot of images are on the social media in various réseaux. And I am very frightened that the notion of history is being turned around and corrupted, and that our only source will be archive. So that's one of my preoccupations, though I'm not a specialist of AI at all. I'm more into the past. Maybe it's more reassuring, I don't know. But I like to research the obscure parts of history, the ones that are lesser known. I think it's a calling as a historian. So I hope I have answered in some ways.
Thank you.
Thank you for asking. Please do. I mean, I'll tell you a funny story. When I was teaching, first I arrived in New York, and I was sort of bombarded into place to teach photography, which was history, which was very hard because my English was high school English. So I had to study like crazy to learn the terms. And I was telling my students about the World War II and how the photographers from Europe came to New York, which is linked to this show. And I explained a little bit, and then one guy, I have a question. So I'm like, okay, what's your question? Because every teacher wants a question. So the guy says, why did they leave their country? I would never leave my country. And this showed such an ignorance about World War II. I'm like, oh my God. So I had to go back, and instead of doing the program, I started telling them about World War II. And then when we came to Vietnam, to them it was ancient history. even though their parents had fought in Vietnam. But when people are traumatized, they say nothing. So their parents had never told them about the Vietnam War. So I invited Philip Jones Griffith, who is a major photojournalist. He came to class and he showed them the images. And they went home and talked to their parents. So in that case, I felt I was useful for history in a very concrete way, which teachers sometimes are not. I mean, I remember showing carousels of slides, which seems also like ancient history, because we have PowerPoint. And when I turned the light off, a lot of people fell asleep. And then I used to turn the light back on and say, hey, wake up, and so on. Put it back out. So yeah, now with PowerPoint, it's more difficult to fall asleep because we don't need the camera obscura. So please ask.
I have another question.
Sure.
About,
He's going to point at you, but it's okay, don't be
devo
shy.
tenerla vicina.
Sì, si può parlare.
No, a question about time, because photography embodies time, the
Yes.
time of the context, the time of producing the photograph, the time of the photographer, of the author. And also me, like recently I'm trying to learn how to develop myself
Yes.
and to print
Great.
films. And when I do it, I feel this paradox that photography somehow has to picture reality, a reality which changes so fast.
Yes.
And when you go back to analog, it takes so much time to, there are so many manual things to do. Also, if the effects you give, everything is manual and it takes a long time and you have to
Yes.
enclose yourself in the dark. So
Yes.
completely
A whole
out of the
different
context.
context.
Exactly.
Yes.
And so I wanted to ask you, what do you think about this paradox?
This paradox.
Yeah, and also to how it is today, that indeed we are used now, comparing to this time.
Yes.
We are even more into a world of social media, of manipulation and
Of course,
all of that.
yeah. So I think that the thing that has changed drastically is about time and memory, and how in analog photography time is expanded and it becomes slower. And there's also one thing that gives me a little bit of nostalgia, that's the contact sheet. When I recently wrote a biography of Shim, who was a member of Magnum, but lesser known than Kappa and Cartier-Bresson, I had the chance during COVID to stay at the agency that was empty and to look at all his books of contact sheets from 1932 to 1956. This was a huge discovery because you could figure out how the photographer moved, how he chose his angles, what was his edit, because we still have the red framing of what he chose, and then in a different color what the editors chose. So that's huge. And that type of memory is disappearing because now with the digital, it's instant. In other words, instead of sending the rolls of film by train, by car, by plane to wherever, the photographer can immediately send images to the people who publish it. So the good side is that we see things instantly. The bad side is that we see things instantly. I have a special idea about this because a lot of my friends are photojournalists, which right now is terrifying because 39 journalists have died in the Middle East to this day, and the numbers go increasing. One of our friends, my husband and I, is called Maxime and works in Ukraine. He's Ukrainian. And recently, he sent us a terrifying video of what was happening in the field at that moment. In other words, there was a mortar and shrapnel coming from the sky, and we hear his colleague shouting, "Go down, go down." You see the explosion. and you see that he was missed by a few meters. And I don't know if the information is important, because it's shock. And I don't know if this shock helps us think and meditate, or if it is the exact contrary. That's another paradox.
Yeah, absolutely.
I hope I have answered
Yeah.
some of your questions.
Yeah, and also like just to link to what you said, like sometimes I feel also when I take pictures that I don't know. Now maybe photography, like well, before, you know, you had to frame something to remember.
Right.
Like there was something to document or to remember. Now I feel also on myself that maybe we need to free our mind of something and we put it.
Exactly. Yes.
So it doesn't have the same significance, the same meaning anymore. Somehow the action.
No, I think, and when I look at this picture, to me, it's a moment that's almost a revelation of the instant. I think you're totally right, and that the relationship with the real, what we call the real, is changed entirely. I sum it up with a cartoon I saw recently in the New Yorker. Because people in exhibitions are often taking a picture with their phone without looking at what's on the wall. So the act of looking has become more trivial. So there is this cartoon in the New Yorker that sums it entirely. Two people are sitting on a bench, and one of them tells the other, "I like this picture because there's a good bench." So it's a joke, but unfortunately it's often true.
Yeah.
It's the only way they can actually sit, and I don't even know if they look at their phone or look at the picture. There was another with people walking around with their phone like this, and then there are two Martians in the sky, and the Martians, one Martian says, "Whoa, they're gonna see us," and the other says, "Don't worry, they never lift their head." So these are jokes, but there is something true in them. Yeah,
absolutely.
As always, jokes are.
I have a question.
Yes.
I was wondering, what would you say is the most important quality in a good photograph? Is it maybe the composition, the use of the light, or the backstory, what's behind it? Because you've provided excellent anecdotes and a little bit of insight into the lives of the photographers. So I was, because sometimes even the picture that's so simple can convey so much. Because I was thinking of the picture of the falling man from 9/11,
Yes.
which I think it's a zoomed in picture of the part of the building and then the man falling down. But yeah, it's such a powerful picture. So that led me to wonder about this. You know, what's the best quality? What's the most important one when you judge a picture?
Yes. No, I am thinking of 9/11 and the fact that I was then living in New York with my family, but I was in France with my parents, who were alive at the time, and the picture was on television, but they didn't show that man falling. They always showed the building. And my belief is that sometimes when you photograph a tragic event, it is more powerful to show what's in the margins, what's happening while the disaster is happening, rather than seeing 300 images of the buildings falling. Because there were a lot of photographers. Just like in Notre Dame, I saw it burning, and everybody was on their cell phones taking a picture. Now, about your composition and light idea, yes, in that case, for instance, it's perfect. The composition is perfect. But what Ilse Bing said in her memoirs is that you look, and at some point there is a spark. And the spark, to me, is not the composition. The spark is the emotion she relates to what she's seeing. I don't know in that case if she made many pictures, but I believe not. I believe that this was the image, and to me, I'm less interested in the concept. You know, these images that have little in them but have a huge text to explain them. For me, I like to first look, then learn, because I don't want the information to submerge the image. I want to have first look, and look deeply, as she looked deeply, as all these people looked. I hope it answers.
Thank you.
But this is a question of taste. Some people are more intellectualized and prefer conceptual art, Duchamp, irony, or whatever. That's not me. I do have a sense of humor, but maybe less ironical or distanced. I'm not into distance.
Can I ask another question?
No, go ahead.
It's a sort of curiosity.
Yes.
Why photography? I mean, what does photography mean to you? Why
I started like this? Well, there are a lot of answers. One of them is archive. When I was about 15, I went to visit my grandmother, who was like my whole family. We were exiles from Egypt. We were thrown out during the revolution. I arrived at her place, and she's holding this big album in leatherette, fake leather, with all her family pictures, and she's going to the garbage chute. And I say, "You're going to throw that?" And she says, "Yes, I think our life was not interesting." And this has the whole weight of nostalgia. And she had a very good life. She lost it. She doesn't want to see the picture. And I think that's one of the main things that turned me to archive, because I like contradiction. So the other thing is that my father was an amateur photographer, maybe not great. He thought he was great, but I don't think he was. And when I was a child, my parents were mainly absent, and so I talked to pictures. I was in front of the stuff that was in our apartment, because he collected art, and I looked and looked, and I asked these pictures questions. And so I was like, okay, I'm going to write about art, but I didn't know it would be photography yet. So the third answer is when I went to study history of art in university, I didn't feel at ease, because I'm not an academic person. I'm more into creation than academia. And my main teacher, who had swallowed an umbrella, shall we say, who was very stiff, asked me, "Okay, so you want to do your thesis with me?" I'm like, "I don't know." And he proposed several topics, and every time I was like, "I don't know." He said, he was exasperated. So he said, "In the end, what do you want to do?" So I say, "I think I want to write about photography." And he said, he put his hand on my shoulder, and he said, "A waste of your education." And so I said, "What education?" And I was finished with university. So I don't have the PhD that a lot of people have, but I'm happy.
Thank you.
Grazie.
A beautiful catalog.
Grazie Carole Naggar e a tutti.
Thanks to you, I'm here.